Well, welcome everybody. I'm hoping that you are getting accustomed to the new normal. I know the Morgan family still is, and the Unstuck group team still is as well. But as promised, we want to join you every week at this time to unpack whatever the current topic is that we think is going to be most beneficial for you in this season of what we're dealing with, not only as a culture, but more specifically in our churches. Today, we're going to be focusing on reimagining Easter online. I know none of us ever imagined Easter would be celebrated only online, but for many churches this year, that will certainly be the case. And so today, the three kind of key questions that we're going to be looking at, number one, just how do we reimagine the Easter service? Secondly, how do we promote Easter without sounding culturally tone deaf, given everything else that our culture is dealing with right now? And then finally, how do we encourage people, especially those guests that are joining us for the very first time for an online service, to continue to connect with us after the Easter holiday? So that's where we're going to be heading in a few moments. But before we do that, let me introduce the team that's going to be with me today for the conversation, beginning with Kem Meyer. In addition to being a longtime friend, Kem is also the president and founder of Less Chaos, Less Noise, and really helping churches and other organizations with communication strategy and a whole lot more, but particularly in this moment around crisis communication. And Kem, it's good to have you for today's conversation.
Hey, it's good to be here for sure. This is important time, so thanks for letting me be part of it.
Yeah, you're going to later on have to explain the whiteboard behind you as well. And also with us is Sean Bublitz, and Sean is a part of our team at the Unstuck Group, one of our top ministry consultants helping churches across the country, but also working behind the scenes to help us with our technology and communications, especially with the podcast. And it's for that reason I wanted him to be a part of today's conversation. But Sean, welcome. You're usually behind the scenes, Sean, so welcome to the camera.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm really glad that everybody's tuned in today. Hopefully I have a face for the camera. We'll find out after today.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
Thanks.
And then as always, Amy Anderson, our Director of Consulting, is joining us today. And she works with churches in a whole lot of ministry strategy areas. But the primary reason I wanted her in today's conversation is because of her background working in weekend programming, and she's going to share some great thoughts with us about how we translate what we've been doing in live services in our churches to what that might look like online. So Amy, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here, and just thanks for opening up the opportunity to have this great conversation.
Absolutely. And then behind the scenes, Mark Meyer. Kem, do you happen to know this Mark Meyer fella?
I happen to know this Mark Meyer fellow for almost 25 years.
Awesome. Yeah. So Mark is Kem's husband, and Mark's on our team, and he's going to be running Q&A for us. So if you want to submit a question at any time through our conversation today, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And Mark will be compiling all of those questions. He may be responding to some of your questions as we engage as well. And then toward the end of our conversation, we're going to take some time to respond specifically to your questions. And then if you'd like to share some thoughts or share questions on social media, you can do that as well using #UnstuckChurch. So wherever you do that, Twitter, Facebook, don't do that on Google anywhere. I think they're having trouble today, so they're struggling a little bit. But let's just dive right into the questions here for the panel. I do want to focus in this first section on how we reimagine the Easter service. And Sean, before we get to kind of the programming side of it and the promotion side of it, maybe you could help churches with the technology side. I know this is for a lot of churches, they've been doing this for years, but because of the coronavirus, for many churches, this is brand new for them. So for those churches that are new to streaming services, what are some of the technology best practices that you would recommend to improve this online experience?
Yeah. Well, I think we would assume that most churches out there are streaming already. But what we found out over the last couple of weeks is that probably wasn't the case, because there have been so many churches that are jumping into this streaming thing that there's been some instability in a lot of the systems that are out there. There've been a lot of challenges with the streaming the last couple of weeks. And so that's been a great measurement to know there's just a lot of churches who are jumping into this for the first time, or maybe they've dabbled in it in the past, but they've been forced to, get really serious about it now. And so the first best practice I just would encourage churches in is make sure that your systems are stable. And I mean, even today, Google having problems with their instability, this happens with the internet. But it's the easiest reason that people will use to disconnect from your service. And so, especially around Easter time, you don't want that. So we've got to ahead of time settle on how we're doing streaming. And there's not really a good way to test this, because you can't reproduce having hundreds of people or thousands of people, however many it is, tune into your service during the week just to test things out. You have to start doing this now so that you can test it on the weekends leading up to Easter. So a really good plan to have in place is to create some redundancy, so that, you may have one platform that you're streaming on, but to have another platform, maybe one or two other platforms that you're streaming to, just so you've got some redundancy in place. So test things ahead of time. Go ahead and run your stream. Make sure you build in redundancy and run these on your current weekend services, so you can have a good measurement of whether they're stable or not. Just real quick, I know there have been a lot of questions from churches about what are the options out there as we're getting into streaming. Here's a quick rundown of those. Living as One. If you just do a Google search for them, I've heard a lot of good reports about the stability of Living as One, just about the platform as a whole. That's a great option. The Church Online platform, which is connected to Life Church, it's really a platform that your streaming can kind of go into, facilitate some conversations, things like that. That's great. A lot of churches have been using that. There have been issues with that over the last couple of weeks, just with stability, but I think they've got those figured out. So you should be good there. Boxcast is another option. Boxcast is a really easy setup. This is a great option for maybe for smaller churches who've never done this before. There's some limitations. There's no interaction through Boxcast, but you can stream even from an iPhone or an iPad using Boxcast. So that's a really good option if you're doing that. A couple of others. We all know about Facebook Live. Facebook Live, there's a lot of stability there because it's Facebook. I've heard recently that they've been hiding their archive services. So that's one thing you may want to consider. There's also some pretty strict copyright monitoring that happens there. So a few churches have had issues with even songs they purchased copyright information for. YouTube Live is another option. Same kind of deal there with the copyright. But I think Facebook Live and YouTube Live could be your great redundancy plan because they're free. You can stream right there. It's very easy to do. So if you have another platform that happens to go down, you can redirect people there. So first of all, stability. The second I'd say is pre-record, or at least consider pre-recording what you do. You can test a lot of things ahead of time just by pre-recording. And so a lot of churches that I see are still trying to do this live. They're still trying to have a live service in the moment, but there's no reason with all of these options that you can't pre-record what you're doing. And you can better control quality overall and address a lot of problems before you even get into the service. So I would consider that. The last thing is create the highest quality experience that you can in your context with the resources you have, with the team you have. Create the best quality that you possibly can. I just looked this up recently. The average YouTube video lasts about 4 minutes and 20 seconds. But overall watch time for those average videos is only 2 minutes. So people on average are only watching about half of a YouTube video. And this is really how we're conditioned to watch video online, is through YouTube now. So what you want to be careful of is that you don't lose your audience before you ever even get to a call to action in your service. Mm-hmm. And quality will do that. If you have low quality, you'll lose your audience. So you may want to even consider reorganizing your service so that you have that call to action even earlier. So the quality technology is important, but it's also content and engagement. Amy's going to get to that in a second.
Absolutely. So, Sean, are you suggesting half this crowd's probably going to tune out about 30 minutes into today's webinar?
That's why I hope we've worked hard enough on our quality and content that they're not. They're going to be
All right, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Amy, let's jump into the service itself. What can churches be doing to make their online Easter services more engaging?
Sure. Well, I'm going to kind of go through 4 questions I think you have to ask yourself. And the first one here is around connection versus production. So I think the question is, how can we increase personal connection with those who are watching? And Sean, you just started to talk about this, but you're going to be in a more intimate setting now. And so you need to shoot it that way. I would say 1, maybe 2 camera shots at the most, and they're mostly straight on so that you're making eye contact with the people that you're talking to during the service. Other subtleties: don't wear a microphone if you can when you film. When you shoot it, use a boom mic so it doesn't look like you're wired up for a room like you normally are. Language is something you want to think through when it comes to, making that connection with people, personal connection. Just remember, you're speaking to people in living rooms, and you've got to comb through your language to make sure it feels warm and conversational. One thing that Kim and I were talking about, we probably want to stop saying thanks for joining us online. I think it's been said a lot the last couple of weeks. Instead, just glad we're together. We're glad you're here. And when you are teaching or talking with your audience, you also don't want to go too long without talking to those people at home again. One church I was talking with, they're intentionally working through their Easter script to make sure every couple of minutes they're adding in a phrase or 2 that'll help them connect with the people that in those living rooms. And then song kind of things. Again, we're talking about connection. We want people to stay connected as we're doing things. You need to choose music that really speak to where people are at today. And we'll talk about more of that in a little bit. But that's my first one. The second question is related to attention span. And Sean, you were just starting to go there. But how can we continuously engage people throughout our broadcast? Teaching pastor Steve Carter, he put out a great resource this week, and he made the point that most of our favorite shows have an airtime of about 22 minutes. So maybe as pastors, we don't want to hear this, but I would say you don't want to go past about 25 minutes in your teaching session. It's going to take a lot of hard work to keep people engaged, especially new people, if you go beyond that. And the overall service length, I would say don't go beyond 45 minutes. And by the way, that's all elements. That's from the first hello to we're done closing out our service. We've given all the direction. As I've been watching some messages online, I'm seeing a lot of programming before we start the teaching, a lot of programming after the teaching, and those people are going to disconnect. The same church I was talking to, they said they're seeing huge drop-offs after about the 30-35 minute mark. So just something to consider. Music and singing. When we talk about continuously engaging, right, music has a fine line. It can be really engaging, and it can also be really disengaging. So I encourage you to think through how you're going to do, and if you're going to do the music portion of what you're doing. You have to remember you're going to have kids and families watching this, so it's not just adults, and we've sent kids somewhere else on Easter. They're all going to be gathered together. So again, back to the songs that you choose. Lyrically, they need to be understandable, something that we can sing along to. And then I would get into the actual teaching part with continuously engaging. Now more than ever, you've got to think about having breath in your message. You've got to think about having maybe humor is that breath. Maybe telling a story on video so you can switch from the shot that you've been in to showing a great faith story, or using that for a transition to re-engage people. And lastly, just really pay attention to the beginning and the ending of your service. Don't over-announce. Don't bring a message after the message, because you want to maybe land it before people are ready for you to land it. The third question, and this is kind of a fun one, I think. You have to think beyond the room. Prior to this, we've been constrained to an auditorium, and we can only do what we can do in a room. But my question is, how can you increase engagement now that you aren't limited to the auditorium? And just a couple of quick ideas. One church I was talking to, and they're in the South. I'm in Minnesota, so we can't necessarily do this, but they film their Easter message at a sunrise time outdoors to kind of create that sunrise feel. I've been thinking more about how can we just broadcast. We're broadcasting to the community, right? We're not just broadcasting to our church now, but when we go online with these things, we're broadcasting to the community. So could you shoot part of your message somewhere in the community? It brings this kind of, worldwide internet back to where we live and what we're doing. Maybe you could show how you're engaged in loving your community right now. You want to show a picture of a church, even people who are unchurched or outside the faith, that they actually want to be a part of that because of how you're loving the community. And one more, and then I'll wrap it up. But I think the biggest engagement component, honestly, is relevance during this time. How do we really make the Easter story relevant to those outside the church and outside the faith? And I'm a really big fan of the resurrection story, and I think we should be telling that story on Easter. I actually think a lot of the people who are joining us, Christians, non-Christians included, think we're all feeling like we're in the Friday, Saturday part of the Easter story right now. We're fearful, we're grieving. There's a lot of loss out there right now. I think we feel unstable. So how can we really practically show them how our God is in the resurrection business? That he has the power to resurrect dead things. He has the power to resurrect me, my marriage, my losses. So that's probably the biggest component to engagement.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's good.
In fact, on that note, my wife has been serving a neighbor down the street who is quite older than we are. I know that's hard for you to believe, but it has led to the opportunity for her to have some spiritual conversations. And this older woman has said for years she hasn't even considered the Christian faith because she can't get past the image of Jesus on the cross. And it's just hard for me to understand that, of course, because especially in this season, we're celebrating what happened 3 days later, the resurrection, and there's still opportunity, even though we're using new technology and new approaches, to still communicate that hope that we're celebrating as Christ followers in this season. All right, Kim, this I just assume at every service we're going to have people showing up for the very first time. But my suspicion is, given where our culture is and the crisis that our culture is facing, we're going to see a lot of first-time guests, if you will, engaging with our Easter services. So my question for you is, if this is the first and only Sunday that a guest shows up for a service, how does the service need to be reimagined with those first-time guests in mind?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's kind of loaded too. Do you remember that Office episode when Michael Scott was following his GPS and he wouldn't stop looking at the GPS even though the road looked different and he drove into the lake? I think that's what I'm thinking about for the church that I love. That Easter is not teed up for us in our marketing outreach like it was in the past. It was a religious holiday that crossed over into a public holiday and people looked forward to it. It was a broad celebration no matter where you were on your faith journey, and you got together as families and you gathered around the table and there's this big holiday and there's cards and there's rabbits. And so it was a communal all skate that teed up crowds coming to us, and we just had to get ready for them. And we made some unique invites, but Easter did the work for us. So here's the thing. You're right. Every weekend we need to be, every experience with our church, we need to be thinking of the first time guest. And this is no exception. And because of the situation, I'm more like excited about our opportunity. We had kind of a heated discussion as a team this morning, listening to a lot of well-meaning churches, and Easter is not canceled, but the marketing engine for Easter is. Just yesterday, Easter Massacre was trending on Twitter because of something that came out of the White House. And so this is nothing to be discouraged about, but our situational awareness matters how we frame Easter this year. It's the answer, it's not the lead. And so you look around and people aren't celebrating, they're not gathering, they're scared, and they're grieving. And this is what the church is here for. We're here to bring comfort and give people a reason to celebrate, show them hope, and get them moving again. But we can't do that if we leapfrog the situation we're all sitting in and act like it's not there. And so this morning, we kind of gathered as a team and comparing notes, and we're all very excited and sober at the reality that everything's online. And now more than ever, we have all these opportunities to engage people like never before. We also have limitless opportunities to repel people like never before. Mm. And so this situational awareness that I'm talking about is just how we reframe it. And so before we answer with Easter, we need to acknowledge, okay, where are people sitting? What are they dealing with? Like what Amy talked about. And then we can come with, there's still a reason to celebrate.
Right.
So I think that's part of the reimagining.
That's good, Kim. Well, I'm going to stick with you on this because in this next section, I want to talk about how do we promote Easter given where we are as a culture so that we don't come across as being tone deaf. I hear you're the expert when it comes to communicating, especially for churches in crisis situations like that. I don't know if you saw yourself as the expert, but I see you as the expert. So here's where I want to go with this one. I understand actually that you have some angst about how churches have been communicating in the last number of days after the crisis. And I think that might help us think about how we should kind of reimagine how we communicate going forward. So can you share some of that angst that you were sensing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The first thing is we are beyond join us online. That is not our answer. That is not what the church has to bring to the need in the world right now. It is the tool, it is the platform, and it's more present more than ever. But our globe, our cities, our communities, our families, my own household, we're preparing for months of disruptions. And our best intentions might come across uneducated. And what I was seeing in the first few weeks of the church's response kind of collectively, we were leading with self-preservation, insider focus, insider language, our systems, here's how we are going to retrofit coronavirus into our systems. And it was just out of order. So I think that there's two ways. None of that is to indict everybody's best intentions up to this point. We're all like, whoa, what are we doing now? And so, but now it's like time out. Like we're in the pit right now before we go back out on the road. And so the timeout is, what do you need to do now? All right. So we're going to regroup. We're reviewing the game films. And I would just say there's two things you need to look at. And these are the biggest mistakes and our biggest vulnerabilities. And it's where we need to focus our attention. One is on our messaging, and the second is on our volume. And I will tell you where I got this information just preparing for today. I went and visited, in the last 48 hours, I went and visited 100 church websites. And out of those 100 church websites, only one of them had a clear and focused message about how they're responding and meeting during this reality. Only one. 20 churches out of that 100 had a banner ad or a tile that you could link to for a page with more coronavirus information. 60 left everything exactly the same on their websites. Everything was exactly the same except a message that said all services are canceled or all services are online. And 9 churches had no mention at all. And so that is communicating a lot. Many of those churches in that 100 were very, very vocal on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook with scriptures and graphic posts, like a graphic designed post, not graphic post, but graphic design. And they were all on the scripture like fear not and do not be afraid and God is with you. But so much of that was out of sequence. So this gets into the messaging. So I mentioned there's 2 areas that we can just be more sensitive, more aware, right? One is messaging. So people's emotions are frayed. Their tolerance is shortened. Their anxiety is heightened. And so many of those things that we are running out of the gates with is not just for our people. The whole world is watching. And it's like we're running into a funeral home and saying, why sad? God's with you. Don't be sad. Here's a scripture. So there's just some sequencing and some sensitivity where we communicate that we're with people. And the thing is, it's not that what we're saying is wrong, but the right thing at the wrong time can have devastating consequences for your reputation and people's trust in you and the church. And so that's why this matters. It's not that I'm trying to wordsmith theology. It's not that I think any of this is wrong, but it discredits our relevance when we don't acknowledge that. Now, it could be something as simple as instead of join us online, services are canceled, or it could be something simple as we're in this together. During difficult times, we need each other. Mm-hmm. Church has left the building. Fellowship during COVID. Here's life may feel like it's on pause, but here's how we're moving forward together. These are the messages that we need to lead with, not all of our trite Christian phrases. Messaging matters. So just remember, everything you're doing, just take an extra beat on your messaging and remember, what are people dealing with right now? How would you say it if you were sitting across the table from them, not as a human? And your communication should be less institutional and more relational as a church. The second thing is volume, and I say this to take the pressure off you and to take the pressure off of everybody that you're here to support. More volume and more activity is not relieving the pressure of this crisis. And I see a lot of just people, not just pastors, not just church leaders, just like reacting and stirring up all this activity, but especially the church. The cutest thing happened just this week. Our grandkids are in town. I woke up and they had converted our living room to a tattoo parlor and hung signs all in our front window offering free tattoos in response to the coronavirus. They just wanted to help.
Yeah.
But free tattoos is not what people need during the coronavirus. And more emails from our church is not what people need from during this crisis either. We are, what's your inbox looked like lately with the responses to the coronavirus? And so we're adding to that volume now more than ever, and that's just not helping anyone. There's information overload even more now. So what can we do as a church to just provide some simple clarity? Last week on your webinar, you talked about being decisive and bringing a calm leadership. That needs to happen in the volume of stuff that we're kicking out. Not to mention, we've already burned out our staffs in 2 weeks. Our tech people, our creative people, our communication people, they are working round the clock trying to generate activity, generate content, generate videos, generate technology. We need to provide what's our focus this week? What's our one focus for this week? So dialing down that volume. So that's what I would say about communicating
out of the crisis. Yeah, that's good. I'm seeing several comments too. We appreciated your funeral analogy in that. So let's shift it though with the specific focus on Easter coming up, Kim. Given all that you just shared, how do we sensitively communicate the priority and the opportunity around Easter then for people?
Yeah. The first thing we have to do is demonstrate, like our number one priority is to demonstrate that we're in it with everyone else. On September 11th, 2001, I worked for Moody's Financial Corporation. We were a global financial corporation. And when those planes hit the Twin Tower, I've always lived in South Bend. I worked in our South Bend office, but our New York office is right across the street from the World Trade Center. My number one job when that happened was to take down our existing website and put up an interim landing page just so family members could find the employees of Moody's. We had 554 people, I think, that were working in that New York office. There was no other response. There was no other mission. There was no other priority. It was, how do we make sure we can count for everybody that was here? And all, if you remember, all the communication channels were shut down. Cell phones stopped working. So literally the only way people from around the world could find these employees was through Moody's website. So we shut it down and put this interim website. And the same is true for us right now. What do people need and what questions are they asking? So let's start. I would say there's 3 things that we can do to demonstrate we understand the reality we're living in. And when it comes to approaching the communication strategy, the first, I'm going to tell you 3 things. 1, get defined. First of all, get defined. Who are your people? What are they facing? What questions do they have? What do they need? And just real simple. Scrap right now, not scrap. I'll take that back. I take that from the record. Put everything else on hold because everything else doesn't matter right now. But for now, what are you doing to keep people connected? What are you doing to provide relief? That's it for right now. And who are your people? And every community looks different. Are you rural? Are you city? Are you high population of undocumented citizens? Are you affluent? Is there a lot of job losses? Is there a lot of medical workers? Who is your community? Make sure you understand what they're facing. Is there a lot of families at home? Just get defined, and how are you uniquely positioned to meet those needs? If you can't answer that question, everything else in your communication strategy falls apart. So the second thing is get ready for people to show up. And you just need to create an interim landing page. Nothing else is relevant right now. The usual stuff is not applicable and it's all on hold. So show your singular focus and don't make people dig through pages and pages of information that's not relevant. Don't make them solve story problems with journalistic reports of minute by minute updates. Many of those websites I've looked at, not just churches, don't feel bad, a lot of websites, it's the minute by minute response. Well, I already have a news feed. I don't need the church to repeat the news feed. I need you to tell me, what are we doing now and what are we doing next? Where do I get help? How do I give help? Make it really, really simple. So that interim landing page, I'm suggesting that you keep it as simple as what I mentioned before. How are you keeping people connected? You're fighting isolation. And 2, how are you organizing resources to meet the needs of the city, providing relief like a church shoe? So the third thing, the first, get defined, get ready for people to show up, because if you remember, we don't have our facilities right now. So if you don't have that interim landing page set up right, then that's their impression and they will not stay, or they may not come. Because remember the stats I shared just a few minutes ago about the 100 sites I meant, that's your facility now. So you can't invite people to your facility until you get ready for them. So that interim landing page is important. And the last thing, really, it's the get relational. And I mentioned that earlier. Just get more personal, more human. Even the late night hosts, we were talking about this today, even the late night hosts aren't trying to keep everything perfect and polished like it was before. It's like Jimmy Fallon is at home in his sweats with his wife, and his kids are holding up the cue cards and they're holding up a cell phone and they're just talking normal. And so the more real language you can use and the more personal and relational you can get. So when it comes to your communication strategy, analog is back, baby. You can pick up your phone, you can send postcards, you can walk and put stuff on people's porches. Your Facebook invite, your e-newsletter has just went into an ocean of Facebook invites and e-newsletters that are going out right now. So they're less effective than they were before. And there is a craving for that human connection. So get ready. So when your people invite people to church, you're ready for them.
Does that mean that eventually everybody else is going to get off of Facebook too, like me? No?
Probably, Tony.
That's good, Kim. I really appreciate all of those thoughts related to communications, not only coming out of the immediate crisis itself, but as we look forward to Easter. But let's turn the corner here. Our hope is we are going to have a lot of people showing up for the very first time. And then our goal as church leaders, of course, is how do we help people stay connected after the holiday? And Amy, I want to start with you, focusing again on the first-time guests. What should we be doing before, during, after? You can pick one or all of them if you want, to encourage first-time guests to come back as it relates to the service experience itself?
Sure. And I don't think any of this is going to be rocket science, but I was thoughtful about this, Tony, because there's some things I think we just need to remember and test our Easter service plan against to make sure we don't forget some of these things. But when it comes to first-time guests, I think before the service, Kim just, she was right. Invite friends, that personal invite. Before coronavirus, the most effective way to bring people to church was through a personal invite. And today that is the same. Like you said, social media is saturated right now. So be personal about that invite. During the service, let them know what you're going to be talking about in the weeks to come. You want to promote kind of the next series or the series of messages that you're going to be talking through, as long as it relates to where they're at today. Hopefully we're answering the questions that they're asking. And if the service is done really well, I think it's good to normalize that experience. So if they took 35, 40 minutes on Easter and it was a really great experience, I would just reaffirm to them, this is what we do every week. We hope you come back. And after the service or towards the end of the service, at Unstuck, we state the win for the service is that people are glad they came, that they want to come back, and that they would actually invite a friend with them. So if we've done that, I think here are some practical next steps for people.
Go slow on that again. I hope everybody heard that. How do we view the win for a weekend service, Amy?
The win for a weekend service is first, people are glad they came, that they want to come back again, and they want to invite a friend. It was that meaningful to them. So
absolutely.
So at the end of the service, invite them to join again. Encourage your listeners to set aside time to come and do this again, because the truth is right now, especially, we all need to be encouraged. We all need to be replenished. We all need that more than ever. And that's what you're bringing. You're bringing God's word to them. So encourage them to listen, set aside time to do that. I already said it, but I'll say it again. Remind them of the practical things you're going to be talking about in the weeks to come. And be heartfelt, be genuine, be real. I think the more we can get out of any type of mode that we can get in when we're on this side of the camera, we want to work really hard to get out of it. Because what we want to communicate is that we're here with you. We're all turning to Jesus. We're all turning to God to see what he has to say. In other words, we want to always be pointing people back to Jesus and not our local church, although hopefully the church is an important part of that. You can give them a way that they can request prayer. In fact, if you've got a strong prayer network, which a lot of our churches do, I'd tell them about that and ask them to share their prayer requests with you. And maybe the biggest one, be ready to address their questions. I think we need to plan as a church to be ready to address their questions. And so there's a question around accessibility. How do we become accessible for questions? How do you ready your team to actually answer those questions? When we were in the auditorium, in the room, they could go down to prayer team members. Maybe you as the pastor have stepped off the platform and can answer some questions. New guests, I think some of them are going to have some questions and they're going to want to process with someone. And so maybe anticipate with your team, what are the questions that we're going to get? And then how would we coach and how would we answer those? Because hopefully you'll need a lot of people helping with that process. So now is the time really to train your teams who are going to responding to that. And I think, Sean, you're going to share in a minute, what are the different ways that they can communicate with us? But just want to say one more thing. I know there's some discussions around, are we going to record the service and then just make it available all Easter weekend? And maybe some on the panel will disagree with me. I actually think for Easter, you should have set times for your services. And here's why. If we're inviting people and we have new guests in the room, we're going to be in the moment with them this way. And when those questions do come in, whether it's texting or however you set that up through technology, I think it's really good for us to be ready at that moment and to have a plan to respond to those questions. And if it re-airs on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and people have questions, we're still ready to respond. But I think we have to be really ready when that first influx of communication comes in. So do you disagree with that, Tony?
No, I actually like that idea. That's good. That's good. We'll let Kim and Sean disagree with you. Kim, let's talk about communications now for that first time guest. How can we or should we be communicating to that guest that joins us for the very first time?
Yeah, I think that how we communicate to our guests that join us for the first time is actually how we should be communicating, just period. in this time, because I almost feel like all of us have kind of been knocked down to guests, because this is all new for all of us. Even people who are part of your church, because there's not our usual rhythm. There's not our usual liturgy. We don't even have, like, there's no Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 work. There's no school, there's no sports, like all liturgies are canceled. So bringing that clarity for our first time guests is also bringing clarity for our own people. And I've got 4 things that I think will help us with that in our communication and just take the stress off, not only how we prepare and how we organize, but how people respond. So the first thing is just give people something to be excited about, right? Like something to look forward to. Here's some examples. Amy, I don't disagree with you. You made me think for a minute. I think Easter is special. And I think it's good for us to create something special around that Easter experience. We're in this together. There's something to celebrate, that communal, we're gathering at the same time. But because of coronavirus, I would challenge us not to require scheduled service times. That is one of the things that's coming across kind of funny right now. And all of our church communications, people need church all week long, right? When they need it, they need it. So I don't disagree with you. But so here's some examples of giving people something to get excited about. We have church when you need it. We've got living room worship on demand. We've got VBS 1 hour a day, Monday through Friday, something like that. We've got access to live pastoral care on phone and live chat. You can look forward to that because we will be here for you all week. So you give them something to look forward to. 2, you give them something special that they can't get anywhere else. Don't try and recreate the wheel. What can we do that you can't get anywhere else? And so some examples I've seen, like the church should be better than anyone to help fight isolation. So what can we mention that we're doing to fight isolation? What family resources do we have or have we curated that we're making available? Can we partner with our government or our cities or people in our congregation, like mental health professionals or counselors or crisis directors that host mental health webinars? This is very important. Are we providing response for people who are in abusive relationships that are in quarantine? These are things that people are struggling to find resources for. So can we give them that they can't get anywhere else? Or these virtual live groups, the virtual study groups, or live prayer rooms like we had talked about. The third thing is we've got to show people where our money's going. I know there's a big conversation around how do we get people to keep coming so they keep giving. Well, that's never been the formula anyway. But what we can do is show people why it's a good return on investment. Part of this is a spiritual obedience. But right now, there are people on your elder board that are like, I don't know about that tithe. I just lost my job. Making sure we can communicate that we are being good stewards of the money that's coming in and that we're not just trying to hold everything in place. And here's one of the things we want to do: show people how the money is being directed to provide crisis care. Show them who are you partnering with in the government or in the medical field or with charities or other partners. How are you building a crisis relief fund? If you can show people where your resources are going, it elevates the confidence. It makes them want to come back. It also makes them want to contribute. And then the last thing is give them something to do. Give them a purpose. So what is the list of needs you have? What are the short-term volunteer opportunities? What are the phone numbers to call? What are the places to donate? I know one of the things that, like, it caught me off guard. I never would have come up with this, but this is so old school. Our church posted a phone number and said, call this phone number all week long with your questions, with your concerns, with your ideas, and it's affecting our weekly gathering sermon topics. And so that it's just like you're leaving an answering machine message, but it's giving people something to do, like requesting a song. So that's what I would say for that.
Are we able to request songs from you, Kim?
I say yes.
All right, Sean, we started asking you about technology for streaming the service itself, but how about as it relates to the follow-up that we're doing with first-time guests? Are there some technology solutions out there that we should be considering?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tony, you start us off. You mentioned we could have a lot of first-time guests at our church this Easter. Crisis tends to force people back towards a curiosity in spiritual things, and hopefully it does this Easter. I'm really interested to see what that response is like. And so, your online service, you have unlimited capacity to host people in your church. Kim mentioned that your website is your facility now. So, but here's the key. I think you want to focus your time following up with the people who are in your community. Those are the people that are your mission field, not the people that are in another state or another country. Those aren't the people that God has put in your mission field. So we've got to have a sense of, with our follow-up strategy, how do we know who's around us? So the first thing I'd say as far as technology, create a digital connection card. A lot of churches that I've worked with don't have one of these yet. They still have something that's in the chair or the pew. Create an online version of your connection cards. You can use a simple form creator. Google has a free option for creating forms. Use something like that, and you want to capture minimal information. Get their name, get their email, maybe their phone number. Here's a big difference, I think, now that we're having these services online. Try to capture their kids' names if they have kids. Ask for that, because we don't want to forget their kids in the follow-up. Follow-up with their kids can be really, really effective, and so that would be another thing to ask for. You can ask for other things like their Facebook profile or something like that, but don't make those things mandatory. Just keep it simple. So a digital connection card. The second thing I'd say is text them. Just utilize texting. We talked about, we're kind of going back to analog, and I know texting is not purely analog, but it's a different way to connect with them. It actually was working really well before the crisis hit. I think it's still going to work well now. It allows you direct access to people's phones. So we love Text in Church as an option for churches to follow up. It's an organization that you can work with called Text in Church. In fact, right now, I think they're offering a free 60 days of using their platform for churches. You can use it completely free. We have an online guest follow-up plan that they created that's on our website, on our coronavirus page, that you can check out. It's got a lot of information. It's really, really great. I'd encourage you to do that. unstuckgroup.com/coronavirus. I think Facebook is actually really applicable in this situation. Facebook usage has soared since we all got back in our homes and we're stuck here. So sorry, Tony. It really has. Everybody's on Facebook but you. Some churches that I've seen have actually created a closed Facebook group. So this isn't public, but a closed group, and they invite anyone who's new to their service into this group immediately following the service. And it gives them an opportunity, like many churches would have another room after the service where new people can come in. This is a virtual room where people can come in and, meet a pastor or someone from your team. The last thing I'd say, and this is not really some amazing technology, but you're going to need a good old-fashioned calendar, whether it's on your computer or just a calendar that you can write on, because you need to be strategic with how you're following up with people. People don't need to hear from you every day of the week, but you need to calendar out strategically, when am I connecting with people? How am I doing that? And then what's my messaging going to be? I think that's going to be really important. So we'll try to include those. I know I went through that quickly, include those in the follow-up also.
Yeah, lots of web address and resources. So we'll include that in the follow-up that we're sending out to everybody. And in a moment, we do have a few minutes for Q&A here, so we're going to jump to your questions. But before we go there, I know for a lot of the pastors that are listening in, church leaders, you've been telling us, actually, we've been asking for your prayer request. And through that, what we've been hearing are some needs like this. How do we build an online engagement platform? How do we use technology in this season? Others of you have been asking, how do we process staff role changes, and along with maybe even potential compensation adjustments that may be required in this season? Others of you have been asking about kind of those critical financial challenges that you're facing, and how do we revisit our budget and reduce cost? And still others then related to that have been talking about moving to online giving strategies. And I know there are a lot of churches out there that haven't gotten to that place yet. I just wanted you to know that we're hearing those specific needs from you. And first of all, we'll continue to provide these webinars and content so that we can, as best as we can, share the best practices and the resources that we're finding to help churches like yours. But in addition to that, I know some of you are looking for just one-on-one coaching during the season, because right now it's almost overwhelming, and it's hard for you, even though all the resources are out there, to kind of mine your way through everything that's available and figure out how do we take next steps as a church. And so what we're going to be doing starting today, and you're hearing about it first, is we want to make our team available to you. And so we're going to be offering 30-day crisis response coaching for any church that's interested in this. And for the next 4 weeks, we'll give you one-on-one or one-on your leadership team coaching in your response to what needs to happen next related to the coronavirus crisis that we're all dealing with. So if that's of interest to you, you can learn more about that at the unstuckgroup.com/coaching, and we would love to connect with you immediately to be able to provide that coaching to you and to your team. All right, so with that, first question is my question, Kim. Tell us about your whiteboard.
Oh, yes, my whiteboard. Well, every day I'm trying to come up with I'm trying to be more engaged and make this more fun for me, because I feel trapped like everybody does. And so I got a new message every day, and I'm trying to keep it real. And this is world headquarters for Less Chaos, Less Noise. And I'm just reporting my numbers to OSHA. And it has only been one day since our last emotional breakdown, right?
One day since the last emotional breakdown. Okay, good. Right. That's good to know. All right, Sean, I think this one is a good one for you, and I have some thoughts that I might piggyback with you. But this question is, how can we help our older congregants who are not tech savvy, like you are, Sean, jump on the bandwagon in this digital age? Since many of them are unplugged, it's just harder to reach them and communicate them and connect with them during this time.
Yeah. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to come alongside of them and help them get connected. I think a lot of older people, I'm even thinking about my parents, don't mention that I called them older to them, but I'm thinking about a lot of older people who need help in this season. Just, they want to engage. They don't want to be, they don't want to but not be involved, but they just don't know how to do it. And so there are certain ways that you can do that without having to be there with them. Just get on the phone with them and start talking them through it. If they have a smartphone or a computer, do that. So that's one way, just really kind of partner with them to help them get the access they need. The other thing I've seen some churches doing is they've started to put together like care packages or bundles that include ways that people who don't have access to technology can still engage even throughout the week, ways that they can take communion, ways they can read scripture along with you, certain times they can pray with you. So I think going, purely analog, I mean, we've just jumped back 30 or 40 years here. Think in that direction. I think that could be a good solution.
Yeah, and there's this technology. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called the telephone, and
yes,
it's interesting. My mother-in-law is actually with us. She's been staying with us the last couple of weeks. We've been enjoying stay at home at the Morgans together, and she has received, I think now, 3 different phone calls from people at her church over the last couple of weeks, and I thought, it's brilliant and yet so basic, especially for those in the older generations. Why aren't we just reaching out with them on the phone? And she loves it, of course. I would never pick up the phone, but she absolutely loves it. Amy, I think this one's good for you. We're talking about how we move from the big production to something that's going to connect more with people, especially as they're watching from their home. But to take it a step further, I mean, in a lot of places across the country, the staff team can't even get to the church to do any sort of production related to Easter. So for those that might be trapped in their home, any thoughts on how they might create something that could be useful even around the Easter services?
Yeah, well, Sean and Kim, you can weigh in too. The first thing that I think about is if you are truly at home and you can't get any tech help, the good news is Apple's made it pretty easy for us to be recording things and, you know, transferring files. Don't be too sloppy, I think, is my first thing. Some people are a little too relaxed when they're trying to communicate from home. I think you said, Tony, one that you saw actually had like a dog in the picture, and they had to let him out while the guy was teaching. Now, I'm sure no one on this call would go that far, but I still think you have to pay attention to environment. You're really trying to bring focus, so you want to remove distractions that would draw people away from what you're actually saying. You've got to pay attention to have some good lighting. You can see all four of us have different lighting situations, and some are probably better than others. But again, you want to bring focus to what you're teaching, so pay attention to those details. Sean or Kim, do you have any quick thoughts on that? If we don't have a production crew behind us and we're shooting something for Easter?
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead, Kim.
Go.
Now, Sean, you're more the expert. I'll follow you.
Well, I think, you know, there are some options out there. I think what you said about lighting is great. And if you have an iPhone or a smartphone, a lot of those have great cameras and recording capability. Again, going back to pre-record, you know, just do it ahead of time, work on it, do it over again if you don't get it right, so that you can ensure that it's as good a quality as you can get for your context.
Kim, we'll give the last question to you. I'll be like the newscasters. I think you have about 50 seconds for this one. You mentioned it earlier, non-intrusive rhythms of communications. What should we be thinking about as far as how often we're trying to communicate with people in this season?
Well, I don't think that is as hard of a code to break as we think it is. If we recognize that our church is a part of someone's life, not their whole life. And so if we just take a minute and we look at how we're surviving in this crisis, what do our inboxes look like? What do our inboxes look like? What does our pets and kids in the home office look like, right? And just think of what's helpful to us. And so the more clarity we can provide.
Is that your cat, Kim?
It is totally my cat.
Nice.
Sorry.
All right. Well, there you go. Let's just call it. We'll put your response in the Q&A that follows up afterwards. So I really appreciate all of you joining us today. We're praying for you on a daily basis. And if you wouldn't mind, take a moment at some time during the next couple of days and spell out specifically, how can we be praying for you? Email that to us at help@theunstuckgroup.com, or share those prayer requests on social media using #UnstuckChurch. And by the way, again, we want to help. And if one-on-one coaching would help you in this immediate season, we would love to do that. Again, you can go to theunstuckgroup.com/coaching to take those next steps. We'll look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week for the next topic that we'll be addressing as it relates to the church's response to the coronavirus. We'll see you next week.